Welcome to United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America on WSGW. Now, here is your host, Kareem Bowen.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America. It is time for Old Man Winter to pack up his clothes and move to another location. We finally hit a 50-degree day here in the Midwest, and so we're excited to see what spring is having come our way. I don't know now. I know that it also is important that I remember what the groundhog did, if he saw a shadow, if he didn't see a shadow. Honestly, I really don't know what it means if he did see a shadow. And but what I do know is that we've hit the 20th of the month, and so of the month of March, and so spring is right around the corner. We got in the studio with us today, my main man Mark. He's coming in from his at home studios. Mark, what's going on, my man?
Not too much. I'm in my dining room today.
He's in the dining room. Look at that wallpaper in the background. Absolutely fantastic. For those of you who don't know, Mark's entire life is a big book of art and collectibles. Mark, share with us what that picture is in the background.
Sure. It's a print. He does limited edition prints. I think this one has 50. It's a fairly large piece. He goes by the name Shag. His real name is Josh Angle. He does this kind of art. It's 50s, kind of mid-century inspired, kind of cartoonish art. He works out of Palm Springs mostly, but he actually grew up in Hawaii, which is where I grew up. So I have a bit of affinity, and I like that time period. So I like his art.
So yeah, Mark has art all over the place. And if you guys remember a while back, for a parting gift when he was leaving as a CEO of Hemlock Semiconductor, I gave him a piece of protest art. So amongst all of the pieces that he has, and so it was kind of cool to see it on display when I stopped by your house, Mark.
Yeah.
We also got with us in the studio John B in the place to be. What's good, John?
Hello. 6 more weeks of winter. That's what it means if the groundhog sees his shadow.
Oh man, 6 more weeks.
Yeah.
Well, we had snow today in Midland. I don't know what happened down in Staten
Yeah, no, it snowed. I think all of the Midwest, we're having some subpar temperatures right now, and so we're getting hit with a bit of blast of the Arctic weather coming, pushing us southward. So I'm sure in Illinois and Joliet and the surrounding areas, Ann Arbor, everyone's getting hit with a little bit of snow on a day. But the great thing about it is that the temperatures are dictating that it's not going to last long. But hey, folks, we are Midwesterners. We know how this happens. We are used to it. We bundle up and we keep it moving. I want to give a shout out to everybody in our social media stream. We got a great conversation planned for you all today. Today, we'll continue our conversation from last week. So if you didn't get last week's conversation, you might want to go back and check last week's session. We were talking about growing inequality and the wealth gap. And today, we're going to pick up in a place what I thought was really, 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 really interesting in the fact that I think that we came to an understanding of sorts of some really difficult content matter. Whether we agree or not, we came to a clearer understanding sometimes of what's being said and what's being understood or what's being perceived. And I don't know about you guys, but based upon our off-air conversations, I thought that was a great find for the three of us. Understanding that sometimes what's being said is not always consistent with what the purpose or the intended perception is. What about you guys? What do you think, Mark?
No, I thought it was a great discussion. As you know, I called you after the fact and kind of within an analog to the situation. I mean, you've asked me before why are white people so uncomfortable discussing slavery and racism, stuff that happened in the past, and I made an analog to the time I spent in Berlin. And I started reading.
I don't want you to get into it. We're gonna
okay.
don't smash the pumpkin. Right. Not yet. We're gonna talk about it, but I think it was really good because what was interesting about it is that Jonathan and I had a very similar conversation when the mic wasn't hot, and so I'm excited about it. A shout out to my man, brother Vicentada Prasad. He's making his appearances all over the place. We certainly thank you. He's doing great work in India. And he showed up at my appreciation service doing a message in India.
Oh, is this the pastor in India?
Yes, he is the pastor.
Okay, great.
Yeah, his father passed away, I think about 2 years ago, I think during the COVID piece, and he has stepped to the reins, and he's been organizing Christian pastors in India, which I think is Hindu um, by nature, and doing great work out there, feeding lepers and covering and the poor and all of that great stuff. So, but I wanted to start. You know how we always start. We always talk about what's hot off the press. But a shout out to all of you. Don't leave as we get through the beginning of the show, because I think that you guys will have some very interesting perspectives to add to the conversation that we're having as we talk about the wealth gap, and we talk about some things, reparation, and really communicating effectively between cultures, between white and black America. There sometimes is a chasm in terms of our understanding and our communication of how we're feeling and what our thoughts are. So we're going to get into that. But before we do that, our hearts and prayers are with the families in Nashville, Tennessee. Another mass shooting has taken place, this time 7 dead, actually, including the shooter, 3 9-year-olds. This was, it's always heartbreaking to me when kids are part of this, anyone in general, but when we see 9-year-old kids who are just budding in this thing called life, it's such a sad thing. So 3 kids, 3 adults, one was a substitute teacher. Talk about pulling the wrong lottery card, getting the sub at the school that day. The director of the school, I believe, or the principal, and then also a custodian. 2 AKAs were used, 1 pistol. And have you guys had an opportunity to see any of the video footage from this?
I've seen a little bit. I've seen her shooting out the window and then kind of patrolling the hallways a little bit. And then I've seen some of the body cam footage of the police. I haven't watched the whole thing. I don't know if it goes to completion or not, but
No, it doesn't go. I haven't seen it to completion. Have you
yeah.
seen it?
Yeah, I watched through one police body camera perspective of basically entering the school to suspect down. And man, it was decisive. I think that the leadership shown and the communication was fantastic given the situation. I think they stuck to their training, and I think that they did their jobs and they did it very well.
Yeah, no, I think that when I saw it, I was really impressed. 14 minutes from the beginning of this, the call in to 911 to the uh, execution of the shooter, the perpetrator. Uh, it's amazing how things are done when there is a protocol in place for things to happen. But my question with all of this stuff, especially with these, it's continually seeming to be young kids. Um, it was kind of eerie to me, I must say, to see um, how this individual came in because of the type of weaponry they had to shoot through the windows, which tends looked to be a bit tempered by the way that they even took the bullets. Um, it was scary to think that you can be anywhere and there is nothing that can keep you secure when we're using this type of weaponry. I mean, you're shooting through, and she just kind of climbs through the window and then just starts walking through the halls. Um, are we okay with our children continually being traumatized? Can you imagine what these kids who are in the vicinity seeing these people being murdered are going to have to deal with the rest of their lives? Mark, I mean, as a man who believes in therapy, what say you in this particular situation?
Well, obviously no one's okay with just continuing. I just think the answers are really complex and multiple. And I think, again, I think if someone really wants to do harm to people, they'll find a way. That being said, obviously, the more powerful the weapons they have access to, the easier it is to do that. Um, I do think we have to do something. And there's no one silver bullet in anything this big or complex. And so I think if nothing else, we've got to start with stuff that I think the vast majority of people agree with. You'll never do something that everyone agrees with, but I think a vast majority of people could get behind stricter laws around making it more difficult for people to get guns, making more detailed background checks. There's a lot of ways to get guns pretty easily, quote unquote, legally through gun shows and things like that. I think you have to start clamping down and regulating more how guns are kind of sold theoretically legally today, and way deeper, more significant background checks on people.
Well, what's interesting about this is in fact a mental health issue. This is a mental
For
health
sure. Yep.
She was actually being treated and by a doctor, and her family thought that she had gotten rid of the guns, and she went out and purchased 2 more AK-47. This is just crazy that it's so readily that she just could go out and do this, and so there's some gaps in that type of system. Jeff Bulls, as a country, what is he saying? As a country, we're definitely okay with it. Why? Because we won't do anything, especially with guns. And I tend to say that, I agree with you, Jeff. I think that there is this understanding. Some of us feel like we're untouchable. We feel like this couldn't happen in our schools. This couldn't happen to our kids. We'll never find ourselves in these situations. And I think that when we do, when you go back and you pick up the carnage and you're picking up all of the pieces that are shattered, many people have a difference of opinion, a different opinion after things happen. But and I told you guys this before, as a lover of firearms, and I take great pride and fun in some of these things that we're talking about. Some of these firearms that are mentioned are firearms that me and my family we have. Um, but I am of this of a strong belief that when it comes to protecting our kids, just because you have the right, and it's legal, does it necessarily mean that it's the best way for us to do it? And so I think that we have to have some real conversations. If our liberties can put people in danger, then how do we deal with that dichotomy? So it's going to be really interesting to see. I don't think that anything is going to happen.
I mean, this happens, how many decades has this been going on, frankly?
This is what 130 mass shootings, quote unquote, based upon the definition of mass shootings. This year, I think we've gotten used to pulling the carnage of young kids off the sidewalks to where we're becoming just dead to the fact that this happens, and we're accepting it as a part of American culture instead of really being creative to do something different about it. And so I think that when we as a community get tired of seeing this happen, people are saying we need to make schools more safe. Do we want our kids to go to schools in places that resemble penitentiaries? Are we conditioning them for the next level of incarceration? Or are we creating places where they can be safe, and they can explore and they can dream and think about great things? Those things only happen in places where kids feel safe. And so I think it's time for us to have some common sense agendas here, in terms of what that should look like. So does that mean that we're giving up our AKs? Does that mean we're doing more background checks? Is it a combination of both? I mean, come on, we got to begin to move the needle. Let's try something until
Yeah.
we had a
I mean,
ban on them. The ban, they removed the ban. Let's try something new. This is one of those things like the smoking commercials. Don't quit quitting. It's time for us to do something different. Were you going to say something, Mark?
No, I was, what I was just going to do is reiterate that. I mean, I think we have to do something, and I think you got to start where you can get a high degree of consensus. And I think some of the areas you've talked about are where you can get high degrees of consensus. On the other hand, like I said before, if someone really wants to do harm to a bunch of people, they're going to do harm to a bunch of people. And so, I mean, so you've had people use their car as a weapon. You've had all sorts of crazy things. And so she could have easily wiped a bunch of kids out at a bus stop with her car. So,
yeah, Roderick McCullough, we need to admit that life is cheap, profit over everything. What's interesting is this. I remember when there was a lot of gang violence, probably back in the 80s, and people were being shot and people were being killed. But a lot of those people were being shot and killed, and they were living to see another day. Some of them survived. But now when you see the type of warfare that's taking place, not only in these situations, but in our streets, they're using military style weaponry. There's no coming back from these types of wounds. It's not like you're going to survive and come back. This is meant to do to kill people. They're murder weapons, and that's why they were military grade. I thought about something, Mark, and I want your opinion on it. Jeffrey Bulls, mass shootings are big business. Gun sales go up, and vendors come into school districts and sell the next best prevention measures. It does appear that a part of this is cyclical. But I thought about this. The very same people who are saying that they back the blue and are support of law officers. I want to throw this thought out there. If you back the blue, think about how dangerous and scary it must be. We were talking about the difference between Uvalde and what took place in Nashville. One of the things that came out of the stories of Uvalde was the fact that because of the style of weapons and the grade of weapons that were being used, most officers carry a shotgun and a pistol on your hip of some sort. You're going in to to stop and to protect and to serve, with a 45 or a 9, and you're going in against someone who's shooting bullets through walls. Uh, and it's a scary place to be. And so one of the things that they were doing was waiting until a tactical team came that had more of an equal based, weapons and their weaponry in their command. And so I thought about it. If we love and we're protecting the blue, one of the things would be, let's not make police officers who are civil servants and are going out to protect and to serve the community. Let's not put them in a situation to where they're going to war with folks who are using military style weaponry. And I think that is something that we've got to look at. I wouldn't want to be a police officer with what's being used on the streets. And it's not just these situations, but it's just your average call. It's the drive-bys, it's the drug deal going wrong, it's the person who has, lost their marbles. These are the same things that are continually coming in. And that was just a thought that came to my mind. If we love and we protect the blue, let's do something so that they can actually feel confident in going in. The guys that were in the video that we saw, kudos to them. I celebrate law enforcement officers when they are doing what they are supposed to do. And this is where we see them, doing what they do at their very best. And it was really kind of a cool thing to see them be brave and courageous in the face of such an adverse situation. All right. So were you going to say anything else, Mark? Or are we going to move forward to the next?
No, you can move on. Yeah.
All right, Mark, why don't we talk a little bit really quick, because we're going to get through this, the breaking bread conversation that we're having. We are challenging people to have courageous conversations around race and what separates us and what divides us and what can unify us. And in doing so, we're creating an opportunity for people to not only hear about these, but to actually have an opportunity to see this take place. So why don't you share a little bit about what's taking place on April the 29th?
Yeah, again, we're going to have a dinner at my house. You and I guess I'm the host in a certain sense, but you and
you're the hostess with the mostest.
Exactly. I like to entertain. You and Aaron are orchestrating this, so again, we're going to invite between 6 and 12. My bias is to go with 12, 2 tables of 6. People over for a dinner. It'll be a potluck. Everybody will bring something to share. And again, I think you're in discussions with Patrice. She tends to host these things somewhat regularly. So we'll look for her guidance on maybe how to run this thing. But the idea is just, again, people of different backgrounds, cultures, perspectives, breaking bread together, getting to know each other. I think while there'll be people they'll disagree on some things, is when I've ever done this sort of thing, what you find out is you have a whole heck of a lot more in common than you have on differences. What you want to see happen at the end is very similar. Oftentimes where you disagree is, what's the best way to achieve that?
Yeah, I've been in those situations before, Mark, and I start talking, and I'm just such a bombastic individual that when people start sharing where they are, I'm like, oh, let me shrink just a little bit in this conversation. So hopefully we don't have too much shrinkage. We have we're able to talk and be open and honest. That's our real desire for what's taking place. And it's going to be recorded, so you guys, it's going to be a live event, so you guys will be able to tune in. And I would really love some audience engagement. So if you're watching and you're listening to the conversation, you guys to give some participation by sending us some questions or maybe some perspectives and points that we can also share. It's going to be a lot of fun, food, fellowship, and fun. I'm looking forward to it. Also, Saginaw Short Film Festival is happening April 30th. That deadline for your submissions are happening. Plans are moving forward. We're getting, that's a Saginaw thing. We're getting to the Temple Theater, meeting with Mike Koleth, who is the director for the theater. Kareem at KareemBowen.com. That's KAREEM at Kareem, BOWEN.com. We're 10 to 15 minutes, all sorts of genres. I'm expecting probably within the next 15 days, we're probably going to get a lot of things in from the time that we were initially. I know I saw some clips of things that people were working on. So I'm excited to see that take place. We're going to make a real quick shift. We were talking on last week, and we were talking about growing inequality and the growing wealth gap. And we talked about what I remember, we called it Reagan economics, when he was talking about trickle down economics, that if we would really put money in the hands of that top 1%, that, the benefits, the blessings of the economy through investments and different things would trickle down to the rest of us. And we got into a place where we were talking about some of the things that were necessary. And Mark, I think that we started talking about the idea that an individual's home is the way that most Americans begin their wealth building portfolio. And we started talking specifically about white America and Black America. Now, for those of you who are listening now, we ended that conversation last week, which I thought was a very spirited conversation that I enjoyed, and was able to kind of continue it off air. And one of the things that we were talking about was, how do we deal with this inequality that exists here in America for Black America? And we're speaking Black America specifically because of the issues of slavery. And we got into the conversation, as you were saying earlier, Mark, that when we start talking about slavery and we start talking about inequality and how do we fix it and how do we repair it, white America is saying, listen, I've never had a slave. You've never been a slave. Why are we having to deal with that or deal with any of these issues? And we began that conversation. And I made the statement to both you and Jonathan that I when we say that, for instance, we're going to do this and we're going to have a Black this or a Black this, and we're like, well, why can't it just be, a this? Why can't we just have history? Why does it have to be Black history instead of just being American history? And I put in the thought or the perspective that as a Black man, I am proud to be Black. I'm Black and proud, and I say it out loud. Thank you, James Brown. And it's because I come from a people through the danger, snares, and toils, through Jim Crow, the Klan, lynching, slavery. We as a people have been very resilient. And so I like to be referred to. They asked me a question: do you want to be African American? Do you want to be Black? I'm like, I want to be the color of the people that died on my behalf. I want to be Black. I'm a Black man, and I'm okay with that. And so there's a pride that goes along with it. And then as we were talking, sometimes when we add that Black conversation, this is Black for Black people, it sometimes is misconstrued or taken in particular ways. And so, Mark, I don't know if you want to pick up at this point and share kind of some of where we were and the experience that you had as it relates to this whole conversation. We're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, I'll give you a couple seconds to put your thoughts together, and we'll get back into this conversation. This is United Shades of Gray, conversations of race in America. Is it too early to take a break, or can we go ahead and go out? We're going to go out. We'll be right back shortly.
You're listening to United Shades of Gray on WSGW.
This is Kareem. We're back with more United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America. And we're in the middle of this conversation. We've been talking about inequality, growing inequality in America, the wealth gap, all of those things. And we're picking up where we left off. We had some off-camera or off-air conversations that we want to bring to your attention because I think that they were great revelations, not that they solved America's issues, but they began to give us a framework by which we can have this conversation. I'm going to shoot it over to Mark, and Mark, begin to share just kind of like what you were saying in terms of where we picked up or left off on last week.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, as we were talking offline, again, I think you fundamentally asked the question of why do white people start to kind of get defensive or freeze up or don't like the idea or the discussion about slavery. And I think it's kind of what you alluded to or said earlier. I've never had a slave. My parents never had a slave. My grandparents never had a slave. And so talking about something that happened so long ago, why should I have to pay for that now? And I'll just speak for me personally. I don't tend to focus on history. Like I've never had interest on my forefathers, where they came from, who they were. I'm kind of a person who's more interested on solving a problem. So, we have poor people today. We have black poor people. We have white poor people. We have Hispanic poor people. And how do we help poor people get out of poverty, irrespective of what race they are? And my thing with you is ultimately, like, as soon as you start saying black or white or Hispanic, there's a certain percentage of the population that's going to make a leap of faith or a leap in logic that says, since you're going down that path, you believe that group should be treated special because that's that group. And I just
Mark,
think
you don't think that should be treated special?
Well, yeah, they should get special treatment, or they should get they should be treated differently going forward.
Yeah, because I was making the distinction at the time of the fact that the Black American, we got all these different individuals who have migrated and became immigrants to this great country, this great nation, which is a nation of immigration and immigrants. And I was saying that Black America is different than every other quote unquote subgroup in America because one, we didn't decide to come here, two, the placement of slavery, and then three, the contributions that Black have played to the betterment of this nation by building the nation. And so that's where that conversation came. Go ahead, Mark. Yep.
Yeah. And I ultimately, it's kind of who becomes the arbiter of who is treated, at what level of poor treatment do you start to get special treatment? And that's just kind of a slippery slope. Kind of as I was driving home, I picked up the phone and called you because I was recalling a time I was a postdoctoral student in Berlin, obviously a very white city. But anyway, I was talking about, I decided to read the book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, because it was obviously a very important part of their history, a very bad part of their history. And it was interesting to me how uncomfortable, Germans were when I walked into the room where I was reading that book, and their immediate reaction was like, hey, that's not me. I'm not a Nazi. We're not like that. And I didn't even have to actually say anything. I was just reading a book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. In a certain sense, to me, it was an analog of like, anytime you bring up slavery to a white person, there's really that kind of same reaction.
Yeah. And I think that that's interesting because, Jonathan, we were having a similar conversation, not necessarily directed about slavery, but the conversation of when we, and I use the term, I said whitewash, but that's not what I meant. When we sanitize the conversation and we talk about the issues or the ills of the lower portion of our community, and we say that this is what we need to do for Americans. We're spending billions of trillions of, headed toward trillions of dollars on a war in Ukraine, but we got Americans that are in this particular situation, that it's received a lot differently than when I say it as a Black man, Blacks in America. And you were sharing kind of, just go ahead if you want to just kind of qualify your statement.
Yeah, well, my point with that was if you come at it, and I understand the thought process on both sides. I think that one group of people actually has kind of been trained to believe that when someone talks about black people are suffering, they need this, it means exactly what you meant. They should be treated differently. I think when you say, and I think that it can be a very good tool to come at it from two different angles at different times. But I think saying Americans are suffering, how do we fix American suffering? I think that it is easier to digest. It's easier to identify with as a white person. And I think that it's disarming, kind of in a way.
And so when I thought about this, I thought this was interesting. And we're going to get to your comments that you put in here, Jeffrey Bulls, because you always add interesting commentary. I thought it was interesting that the issues that I arise, I'm not going to talk about all Black Americans, I'm talking about me. The issues that I raise are okay when I use the term sanitize, when they are not inclusive of a race, but when they're inclusive of all races and not saying, well, Black Americans, and it's easier or more palatable for many people to receive. And I understood when you said it, and when Mark said it, I understood exactly what you meant. And I'd never really, I guess, taken time to think about, we feel like you're saying when you talk about slavery, like, and you talk about how we need to pay for slavery, like you are responsible. There was the responsibility of slavery that many white people may feel, and I don't know if this is true for all white folks or just the two I'm talking to, that there's like, I am pinning the ownership of what happened with slavery on you. And that has never been the case, but it did give me a moment to pause in terms of how we articulate these arguments and these discussions. But one of the other things that I think that is really interesting is because that kind of conversation also lends to the fact that we have to, in order for us to talk about it, we got to feel good about it. And if it makes me feel any kind of way, then I don't want to have that conversation. And I often have to remind, white America that it's not fun for me to talk about slavery. And this is what we talked about off air. I don't get joy and pleasure out of talking about what happened to Black men, who were quote unquote strange fruit, as the artist said, hanging from poplar trees. It's not a fun thing, but I think that in order for us to really talk, as Mark is a problem solver. That's who he is as a person. How can we solve the problem? How can we solve the problem? One of the things is if I'm looking at this from a corporation, where did this problem come from? How did we obtain this problem? And that's really what I am addressing. This is how we obtain this problem, and this is how this problem became pervasive, and the entailments of this problem have shown itself, over the course of time, and how that operates. I want to give real quick. Jeffrey Bull says just evening the playing field doesn't go toward forward will not fix it. This is why reparations is the conversation. It's interesting that you said that, Jeff, because that does come up. Saying that white people today never owned a slave is obtuse. Ooh, obtuse. I haven't heard that
I
one.
don't know that that's the proper use of the word. Okay.
White people today still benefit from the wealth obtained from it. Not only did our ancestors build this country for free, we were also blocked from wealth from the government itself. That is historical plunder that must be atoned for. And you're absolutely right. After the slavery was dissolved, we then were dealing with regulations with Jim Crow and things that put those blacks who are now, quote unquote, no longer 3/4 human, but a whole human, back on those same plantations with no work, working for free and in less than advantageous conditions. You're right. Roderick McCullough, America has paid reparations to other groups that have been harmed. Just a major issue when it comes to Black people. And why? That's a good question, Rod, because I asked that same question. America is not, we're not foreign to the concept of reparations. And we were talking about this before. So when we look at what we did to Hiroshima and we look at how we responded, when we look at what happened to the Native Americans and how we responded, we have example after example of how we have responded in repertory fashion to different groups, but it does appear to be different for for Ados, the African descendants of slaves. And I would ask the question, why? What is there a difference? And if so, why?
I'd have to. I don't know the answer to that question, to be honest with you, because I haven't. You'd have to give me all the. I'd have to go back and look at all those instances. I mean, Hiroshima was really we rebuilt Japan, and frankly, we
Yeah.
helped rebuild Europe. And I guess you could argue that's a form of reparations. I guess. You know what we did with the Indians was again give them land, and
They're
give them
not
certain
Indians.
rights.
They're indigenous people now. I think
Okay, sorry,
Native
Native
American,
Americans.
now indigenous people. Yes, go ahead. I'm
Again,
messing.
would give them land to build on and certain rights in that land. You know, I'm just not a big believer in just giving people money because I don't think ultimately it solves the problem. How many professional athletes, how many of these $1 million lottery winners end up bankrupt? And they've got all the money in the world. And so I'm just not a big believer in giving people money because I just don't think that ultimately solves the problem. To me,
Mark,
this is,
go ahead. You're a good Catholic guy, right?
yep.
The good book says that wine maketh merry, but money answereth all things.
Okay.
That's in scripture. So, and we're talking about one of the issues that you wanted to address was the wealth gap. So, wealth is the accumulation of money and other things that contribute to a financial base. So that's interesting. What I
Yeah,
want to
because
do is,
rather than give people money, I'd rather, you know, because I think one of the easiest ways out of poverty is education. And I'd rather invest that
if you're
money.
gonna give me $5 million of education, sign me up for the $5 million, please. Go ahead.
I mean, well, the thing that's going on in San Francisco is absurd because no one can ever pay for that. But that's a different discussion. But
Absolutely.
I'd rather invest the money in education. I mean, one of the things you've argued is that right or wrong, that you think the social welfare systems had a ton of negative, at least whether it was intended or unintended. Um, you and I may disagree, but it's had a ton of unintended or negative consequences on the Black family. I mean, what about we just blow that up and use that money to improve schools in the inner cities?
Well, okay. Jeff brings up a good point, Mr. Bulls. He said the money is owed. What is done with it is besides the point. And so, and this is a
But
conversation.
who decides you're owed money? I mean, I could argue like I know how much value I created in my career, and
Absolutely.
I don't feel like I got paid enough for that. So I want
Well,
some of that.
there's a difference of being paid enough and not being paid at all. And I think that's the difference. What I wanted to inject in this conversation is that San Francisco watch Ukraine get reparations. You're absolutely right. I was thinking the same thing. But it's in San Francisco, there is for the first time, I think there's a second city that have voted to put this concept on this idea of reparations on the ballot. And some of the things that they were proposing was which a budget would have to be seen with this, and I don't
There's
think
just
that.
no way you could do it, man. It's just
But it's
ridiculous.
$5 billion to every Black adult, elimination of personal debt, which I like the elimination of personal debt and tax burdens. I like that idea. Guaranteed
I like
annual
that too.
income. Yeah, guaranteed annual incomes, 97,000 at least for it's at 250 years. These are arbitrary numbers and things that they're throwing out there, but I think that they're along the right lines in terms of how the only way to really cure this debt is a debt is, you know, this wealth is accumulation of money over time, and that started at a time when Blacks weren't allowed to own patents. It started at a time when they couldn't own land. The idea with voting was the fact that they couldn't vote because you had to be a landowner in order to vote.
Yeah, but
And
if
then
you look at the richest people in the world today, Kareem,
what's that?
if you look at the richest people in the world today, those people are playing on the same playing field in the sense of they've accumulated their wealth over the last 10, 20 years. And it's again, back to our original discussion, it's really this tech boom. And you've got these tech monopolies in essence. That's where the real wealth is. And then
Well, I'm talking just about that's future wealth once again, and that's kind of like this way forward, because this is what one of the things that is interesting is that I think that we have dealt for a long time with the equality as Americans, that Blacks are now Americans, and we want to make sure that equality as it relates to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights now is fully applied to them as individuals. And we saw that even when that took place in 1865, that there were systems that were put in place to stop those equality, that equity being evenly portrayed to all people. Now, this is them coming off of a plantation, not owning anything, not having health care, not having a home. They literally were put on streets. And so the next thing was that being homeless became a crime. And so this is where the concept and historically speaking, the concept of policing Black communities has started, and one of the foundations of why we need to look at that system as well, because policing began when slaves were freed, now removed from plantations, and homelessness became a crime that put you back in prison. Once you were in prison, then those same slave owners who owned you as plantation owners could go back and get you for labor, pennies on the dollar, didn't have to take care of your health care, didn't care if you got sick tomorrow, because if you did, unlike when you were their slave, they'll just kick you to the curb and buy another one out of prison. And so those were things that became problematic in the course of people, Black folk, just becoming 100% whole human, and then Americans to be able to have equity as it related to the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. So we've dealt with and have been dealing with since 1865 the issue of equality as it relates to the Constitution and Bill of Rights and what it means to be American. What has never been addressed in America is the equity from the entanglements of slavery that was never been fully addressed. And so you can make me a full American, but if at that point in time I have generational poverty that has been created, then we have to understand that generational poverty is generational. So, an object at rest stays at rest. An object in motion tends to stay at motion. And some of the things that we want to start from ground zero today are the entanglements, the entailments of what took place, the 400 years before 1865 took place. And I think that it's worth mentioning. Sharice Steele Phillips, we as Blacks have been afforded opportunities that our ancestors were not privileged to. So what are we doing now as a people to prosper ourselves, children, grandchildren, and so on in preparation for the future, not taking away from our past, but using it to motivate us to move forward. I'm a Black woman, so please don't throw stones at me for my honest opinion. No, I think you're ignorant to those facts, Sharice, and I love you, but I think that you're ignorant to the fact. No, I don't want to say ignorant. Let me correct that. I think that I love what you're doing. And I think that you're stepping where Mark is. And I think that is an essential piece. There are some things that we've got to swallow a reality pill, because there are some things that we're creating that are problematic for our own community. However, that issue of today has nothing to do with the issue that has gone unaddressed as it relates to the issue of how do we bring equity to a past. I can't build a building or a community of buildings and not receive benefit from those buildings. And then the owner makes rents off of those buildings, and then he passes those buildings to his children, his grandchildren, grandchildren. And I did the building and never been paid. There's something we do in America in contracting. It's called put a lien on that property, because you have a responsibility to be paid for the work that you did. And that has never come to fruition here in America. Knowledge is power, and no one can take that away. I agree with you. One of the greatest things, and that's what Mark was saying, that we can have is education. And I think that education is important. Respectively, politics won't close the wealth gap. No, I agree. And Mark, we're going to talk a little bit, because Mark has had a real desire.
Jonathan's raising his hand. Oh, he's telling us it's 5 minutes. Okay, sorry, Jonathan.
You weren't supposed to give away our internal secrets, Mark. That's what's happening when you're in your studios all across the world. No, yeah, he's telling us 5 minutes. No, Mark is my guy. I love Mark. So Mark, entrepreneurship, and you were talking, one of the things that your heart is really about is how can we really help small businesses. We're not talking about pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. We're talking about how can we do some things. And I know that you were angered when you thought that there was an opportunity to create these things where we could train, empower, equip, and then maybe do infusions of capital for Black businesses. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I think you said it well, and I didn't. You had Jeffrey's comment up there briefly. I didn't see it all. And Jeff and I don't always agree. Frequently, we don't agree, but sometimes we do agree. And I tend to agree with Jeff largely there. I also believe. I think he made a comment earlier about the playing field.
Yeah.
And during the pandemic, and this is we only have a couple minutes left, but I saw this little video to me which really put things in perspective. They had all these kids line up and they raised their hands if you had certain benefits of like 2 parents and middle class, and you run a 100-yard race, and the kids got to go start ahead. They finish the race, and the guy says, "Well, is that person necessarily the fastest?" And it's no, not necessarily. That doesn't mean they're not fast or they don't deserve to, what they've earned, but that means there's maybe someone more talented that is starting from behind. And I think that's what we're talking about. And the questions are, what can we do to help talented people that really want to work? They're coming from a disadvantage, be successful. And that's kind of what I'm about. And the idea was really, you have all these people, talented people trying to start businesses that don't have the same access to equity that maybe someone like it's always interesting. People who don't need money can get money very easily. So I can go into a bank and get a loan for anything.
And that's across the board. Black, white, Puerto Rican.
It doesn't matter. Money is colorblind, basically. But there's talented people that come from tough areas, disadvantages, that don't have the same access to capital. And how could we, help them get that by leveraging local businesses who are looking to make an impact in the, Black and Hispanic community. Fortunately, I couldn't get that to go anywhere. Maybe it's worth trying again. I don't know. But
well, we were talking about this, and one of the guys, I think our 94th district rep, Mr. O'Neill, was in the conversation. Not sure if he's still in there. If you are, give us a shout out. But one of the things that we're putting together, Mark, and you're built into this plan. We haven't had an opportunity to talk about what it looks like. We've talked about it loosely, but you being a business mentor for a minority business hub where you could come in and provide some.
I'd love to do that. I've done that a few other times, as you know.
Yeah. And so that's what we're positioning now, so that entrepreneurs can come in, and not only can they get the support, because I think it's amazing that we give them support. Some people are pretty savvy; they know how to do their business and they understand how to put their business together. But as you said, Mark, you have this great idea, but you don't have the backing to make it happen. And then there are some of us who have relationships with folks who have monies to help make those things happen. So if we can vet businesses and then put them together and find funding pools where they can, just like we do on Shark Tank, create those opportunities for them to get what's necessary to really build those types of things.
Yeah, this is again where I would challenge businesses. We tried to start to do it at Hemlock. I retired in the interim, but of like reaching out to schools in disadvantaged areas and trying to find the best students and giving them internships or co-ops, and to give them exposure to a world they wouldn't normally typically get to experience, because there's talented people everywhere. They just need an opportunity.
So I think one of the things that we should pull out of this conversation is that we're going to move with some of the things that we're talking about right now. I'm going to be looking to pull in some individuals that are saying, listen, let's stop talking high pie in the sky. But what are some reality things, some real things, tangible things that we can do to bring these groups together so that we can begin to create these opportunities for minorities in our communities to really begin to build wealth and grow business. I want to thank you guys for continually listening to our conversation as we banter on about all the things that we know nothing about. Thank you for today. We look forward to talking to you in the future. God bless each and every one of you. Grace and peace.